Don't move, Officer Jake Brenner shouted, his hand clamping down hard on the wrist of the well-dressed black man standing quietly in the middle of the First Fidelity Bank lobby. The room froze. A white woman holding a toddler gasped. A businessman with a Bluetooth headset slowly turned his head. Even the security guard at the front door, a man built like a fridge, looked confused. The black man blinked. "I'm sorry," he said, in a calm but surprised tone. Jake didn't hesitate. "You're under suspicion of attempting bank fraud. Hands behind your back." The man raised his hands. "Confused. This is my bank. That's my account. I said, hands behind your back," Jake bellowed, already reaching for his cuffs. Click. One wrist click. The second. "Sir, one don't understand," the man said, now handcuffed. "I was making a withdrawal from my business account. My ID is right there. Funny how many of you got fake IDs these days," Jake snapped, his voice dripping with contempt. The manager of the bank, a short, sweaty man in a navy blue blazer, emerged from his office. Officer, I think this is a misunderstanding. That man is Mr. Elijah Brooks. He owns Step Back. Sir." "I got this," Jake said, waving him off. Elijah's jaw tightened. He looked around the room at the staring eyes. "I'm not resisting, but this is wrong. I'll be the judge of that," Jake said smugly. And then it happened. As Jake reached for his radio, something slipped from his shirt pocket. It bounced once on the polished marble floor, then spun slowly to a stop. It was a small gold object, a badge. But not a police badge. It was a Federal Service medal, issued only to decorated intelligence officers. A woman gasped. Elijah stared at it. So did the bank manager. So did Jake. Elijah's voice was low. "You dropped your medal." Jake's face went white. That's not." He scrambled to snatch it up. But it was too late. The bank manager had already picked it up. "United States Intelligence Service. Valor under fire." The manager read out loud, his voice trembling. "This isn't yours, is it?" Elijah turned. "Calm now." "No, it's mine." Jake froze. The lobby went dead silent again. You're a Fed?" Jake asked, his voice cracking. Elijah looked him straight in the eye. "No, I'm a retired intelligence officer. Spent 15 years overseas gathering intel that saved American lives. You just handcuffed me in front of a crowd at my own bank because of how I look." "I didn't know," Jake stammered. "You didn't ask," Elijah replied. Jake's hands trembled. You thought I didn't belong here," Elijah said flatly. The silence broke when a woman near the ATM whispered, "Oh my God." Jake unhooked the cuffs with shaking fingers. "Sir, Elijah stepped back. "Don't call me sir now." The bank manager cleared his throat. "Mr. Brooks, I am so sorry. This is completely unacceptable." Jake took a deep breath. "I need to explain." "No, you need to listen," Elijah said, his tone now sharper, cutting like steel. "I served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and half a dozen places I can't say on record. I've survived bombings, torture, betrayal, and hell. But I never expected to come back home and be treated like this for walking into a bank with dark skin." "I didn't," Jake tried again. "Yes, you did," Elijah snapped. "You saw a black man in a suit, and your first instinct was to put him in cuffs. No questions, no evidence, just assumption. If this is how you treat civilians, I shudder to think how you enforce the law." The room was dead quiet. The security guard spoke up softly. "I saw the whole thing. Mr. Brooks was polite, never raised his voice. Didn't do anything suspicious." Jake stood still. "I've made a mistake." Elijah's eyes didn't blink. "A mistake is taking a wrong turn. This was profiling." Jake's mouth opened, then closed. Elijah walked slowly to the counter, picked up his ID and the check he'd been trying to deposit, and placed them in his wallet. Then he turned back. "You know what hurts the most," he said, voice cracking just slightly. "I spent years defending this country so that people like you could sleep peacefully. And today, I realized people like me can't even walk into a bank without being treated like criminals." Jake's eyes were full of shame now. I never asked for special treatment, Elijah added. I asked for basic human respect. Outside, sirens wailed. Someone had called the precinct. Two more officers walked in, looked at Jake, looked at Elijah, and paused. One of them recognized Elijah instantly. Captain Brooks. The younger officer asked, stunned. Elijah nodded stiffly. Retired. Jake's face crumpled. The officer turned to Jake. What the hell did you do? Jake muttered. I thought he was. You thought wrong, the other officer growled. This is the guy who uncovered the Ivory Claw sleeper cells in Mali. He's a damn legend. Elijah looked tired now. I don't need a parade. I need accountability. The precinct opened an internal investigation. Jake Brenner was suspended. Elijah didn't press charges, but he did speak. At a town hall meeting 3 days later, Elijah stood on the stage, looking out at a sea of faces. White, black, Latino, Asian, young, old, all gathered to hear his story. I'm not here for revenge, he began. I'm here for truth. He told them everything. The deployment, the silence, the long years of putting mission over self, and finally, the moment when a white cop decided his skin color outweighed his identity. He ended with this: I don't want your pity. I want your courage. Speak up. Change the system. Because the next time someone's badge falls, I hope it reveals not shame, but honor. The room erupted in applause, but Elijah didn't smile. He stood there, arms at his sides, the weight of years bearing down on his shoulders. After a moment, he stepped off the stage and made his way down the aisle. People tried to shake his hand. Some called his name. Others just nodded solemnly, guilt or gratitude in their eyes. A teenage boy stood near the exit, his eyes wide. You were really in the CIA? He asked quietly. Elijah gave him a small nod. That and more. You didn't look scared, not even when the cop cuffed you. Elijah crouched down slightly, eye to eye. I've seen things that would freeze the blood in your veins. But nothing scares me more than silence in the face of injustice. The boy stared, then whispered, Thank you. Elijah left the building and stepped into the night, the crisp air brushing his skin. He didn't realize how tense he was until his shoulders finally relaxed. But peace didn't last long. A man was waiting by the curb. Officer Jake Brenner, not in uniform, just jeans, a hoodie, and eyes filled with something more than shame, desperation. Elijah paused, sighing. If you came here to apologize again, don't. Jake held up his hands. I know, I messed up, and nothing I say will fix it. Elijah looked away. Then why are you here? Jake stepped forward. Because I want to do more than say sorry. I want to understand. I want to change. You want me to be your teacher now? Elijah scoffed. No, I want to be better, and I don't know how. Not without facing what I've done. Elijah studied him for a long moment. Sit down. Jake blinked. What? There's a bench. Sit, listen, and don't interrupt. Jake obeyed, lowering himself onto the bench like a man walking to his own judgment. Elijah sat beside him but didn't face him. I was 10 when I first got stopped by the cops. Elijah began, walking home from school, backpack, science project in hand. Cop pulls over, asks what I've got. I say a volcano. He makes me empty the whole thing on the sidewalk, humiliates me in front of my neighbors, then says, Can't be too careful. Jake closed his eyes. I was 14 when they cuffed me because I matched a description. Turns out the guy they were looking for was 43, bald. I had an afro. Elijah's voice was calm, dead calm, the kind that comes after too many storms. I was 20 when I joined the agency. Thought I'd escape all that. But even in black ops, I got second-guessed more than my white teammates. Even after saving lives, even after bleeding. Jake looked over. Why didn't you leave? Elijah finally turned to him. Because if I left, the system wouldn't get better. I stayed, so maybe, just maybe, the next black kid walking into a bank wouldn't get cuffed for breathing. Jake's voice cracked. I was scared. Elijah laughed, a bitter, tired sound. Of what? My bank slip, my credit score. I don't know. Jake admitted. That's the truth. I don't know why I did what I did. I thought I was being cautious. I thought I saw something, but now I think I only saw my own bias. Elijah let the silence stretch, then said, "Do you know how many black men you've arrested in the past year?" Jake hesitated. "A lot." "How many were later proven innocent?" Jake lowered his head. "I don't know." "Start there," Elijah said. "Audit yourself. Ask why, every time." Jake swallowed. Can I? Can I do anything to make this right?" Elijah stood. "You can tell your story. Own it. Speak it out loud. Let people see the truth in you. Maybe then they'll see it in others." He walked away, not looking back. Jake sat there for a long time, staring at his reflection in the bank's darkened glass window. Weeks passed. Elijah's story had gone viral. News networks picked it up, not because of the badge, but because of the calm with which he faced the injustice. The speech at the town hall was replayed across social media. He was invited to speak on panels, podcasts, and universities. One afternoon, a journalist interviewed him live on national television. "Mr. Brooks," she asked, "why didn't you press charges?" Elijah looked into the camera. "Because I wanted something bigger than punishment. I wanted transformation." She nodded slowly. "And Officer Jake Brenner, do you think he's changed?" Elijah shrugged. "That's not up to me to say. That's up to him to prove. Not with words, with work." Meanwhile, Jake did something no one expected. He quit the force. He applied to join a nonprofit working on police reform and racial bias training. He spoke at schools, at police academies. He told the story of what he did to Elijah in full detail, every ugly part. He called himself out. Racism, he said to a group of new recruits, is not just hatred. It's assumption. It's fear, dressed as caution. It's letting the shape of a man's face define the story you tell yourself. I did that. Don't be like me. Elijah heard about it. Read the articles. Watch the clips. One evening, Jake stood backstage at an event, waiting to speak. The host tapped his shoulder. "There's someone here who asked to see you." Jake turned. Elijah was there. Jake froze. I didn't come for you," Elijah said. "I came for the message." Jake nodded. Elijah stepped forward. "But I'm proud of what you're doing. Keep going." Jake's voice was tight. "Thank you." And then Elijah did something that surprised even himself. He held out his hand. Jake took it. In that moment, cameras flashed, but neither of them cared. They stood together, not as cop and suspect, not as white and black, not as accuser and accused, but as men trying to fix something bigger than either of them. And maybe, just maybe, they would. 3 months had passed. Elijah Brooks sat at his kitchen table, the steam from his black coffee curling upward into the morning light. His home, tucked in a quiet Virginia suburb, was finally silent after a whirlwind of press interviews, college speeches, and public conversations. But even in silence, the memory of those cold handcuffs stayed. He reached over and touched the edge of the bronze service medal, sitting in a glass case near the window. He never put it back in his jacket pocket again. Across town, Jake Brenner was preparing for another uncomfortable morning. He adjusted his shirt collar in the mirror of a tiny hotel bathroom. Since leaving the force, he'd moved out of his house. He couldn't sleep there anymore, not after realizing how blind he'd been. He checked his phone. A notification from a news app. Former cop turned speaker pushes for reform in local departments. The thumbnail was his own awkward face. Under it, the headline read, "The officer who handcuffed a hero, Jake Brenner, faces his past." He sighed. Later that day, at a community center in the heart of Richmond, folding chairs were lined up in rows. Jake stood behind a cheap plastic podium, holding a sheet of paper he wouldn't end up reading. He looked out at the crowd, mostly young cadets, some black, some Latino, some white, a few in hijabs. They were the next wave, the next uniform. 3 months ago, Jake began. "I made a decision that I thought was right. I saw a black man in a suit and assumed he didn't belong in a place of wealth. That man turned out to be Elijah Brooks, a decorated intelligence officer, a war hero." Some people in the crowd nodded. Others crossed their arms, skeptical. "I didn't beat him. I didn't pull a gun. But I did something worse. I dehumanized him. I saw a stereotype instead of a person. That's the poison we don't talk about in training. A Latina recruit raised her hand. How do we avoid that? Jake looked down, then back up. You slow down. You ask questions. You check your fear. You don't let your bias grab the wheel. Another voice. Did he ever forgive you? Jake paused. He didn't have to. He lived his truth. I had to learn mine. Meanwhile, Elijah was sitting in the green room of Howard University, preparing for a speech he never thought he'd be giving: race, respect, and return, a veteran's truth. He stared into the mirror, not at his reflection but at his father's. His mind flashed back to a warm Georgia porch. His father, Benjamin Brooks, a tall man with skin like bronze and a voice like gospel, once told him, "Boy, this country'll love you in uniform but fear you in a hoodie. Know that, and still love it enough to fight for its soul." Elijah blinked back a tear. He walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. "Thank you," he began, "but don't clap for me. Clap for every black man who bit his tongue so the world wouldn't label him angry. Clap for every mother who prays her son comes home alive just for jogging. Clap for every girl who codes her tone in interviews so they don't call her aggressive. Clap for them. I'm just a mirror." He spoke of war, of loss, of love, of coming home to a country that sometimes forgot who built it. But most of all, he spoke of choice. The cop who handcuffed me, Jake, he made a choice that day, a wrong one. But afterward, he made another, a better one. That's what redemption looks like. Not words, actions. A student shouted from the balcony, "Do you trust cops now?" Elijah didn't flinch. "I trust the truth. And the truth is this: systems don't change unless people do." One by one, back in Richmond, Jake visited the home of Elijah's mother, Ruth Brooks. After Elijah told him she'd be open to speaking, Ruth opened the door slowly, her silver hair pinned into a neat bun. She looked Jake up and down. "You're the cop." Jake swallowed. "Yes, ma'am. You got some nerve showing up here." "I do," he admitted. "But your son said you had a story I needed to hear." She raised an eyebrow. "Did he now?" Jake stood quietly as she stepped aside, letting him in. On her mantle were photos: Elijah in fatigues, Elijah at graduation, Elijah as a baby in a tiny bathtub, a full life. She poured him tea without a word. "You see that photo?" she said, pointing. Jake nodded. "That was Elijah at 8. Came home crying because a neighbor told him he couldn't be Batman. Said Batman wasn't black." Jake looked down. "He asked me, 'Mama, can I still save people if they don't want me to?' I told him, 'Yes, baby, especially then.' And now I gotta ask you, are you ready to save people who might hate you for your badge?" Jake's eyes watered. "I'm trying," she nodded slowly. "Then you better keep trying." Months later, something unimaginable happened. The mayor announced a new task force on police reform and appointed Elijah Brooks as advisor. And he insisted on one condition: Jake Brenner would serve on the team too. The press had a field day. "Why would you partner with the man who cuffed you?" one reporter barked at Elijah. Elijah smiled coolly. "Because I want results, not revenge. I've seen who Jake is now. He's not perfect, but he's honest. And change needs honest." Together, they rewrote curriculum. They changed stop and frisk policies. They created a system of accountability that included the voices of citizens and veterans. Jake and Elijah stood on stages across the country, one with a past, one with a medal, both with a message. At a final rally in D.C., 5,000 people stood before the Capitol. Elijah took the mic. "America isn't perfect, but neither are we. What matters is what we do after we fall." Jake stepped up beside him. "And whether we use our badge to protect or to project," he said. "I did it wrong, but now I choose to do it right." The crowd cheered. That night, as they packed up, Elijah said, "You know, there was a time I wanted to bury that day at the bank forever." Jake nodded. "I still replay it every night." "You should," Elijah said. "So do I, but not to feel guilt. To remember what it costs to ignore humanity. Jake looked at him. You still don't think I deserve forgiveness? Elijah smiled faintly. You earned it. Every damn day since. And as they walked off under the city lights, the wind picked up. Jake turned to Elijah. You still carry that medal? Elijah pulled it from his coat pocket. Jake stared. You're still wearing it? Elijah nodded. Not for me. For the next person who sees it fall and learns who we really are underneath. 6 months later, Elijah stood at Arlington National Cemetery, dressed in a black wool coat. The wind swept across the rows of headstones like a whisper of memories. In his hands was a folded flag, not from a recent funeral, but one he'd kept since the loss of Marcus James. His best friend from the agency. Marcus had died during an op in Syria, saving Elijah's life in the process. He hadn't visited the grave since returning home. Until now, he crouched slowly, resting the folded flag against the stone. I should have come sooner, he whispered. You'd laugh at all this. Me, doing speeches, working with a cop. His voice cracked. You always said the fight didn't stop when we came home, that the real war was here, in the hearts of men. Behind him, footsteps. He didn't turn. I figured you'd find me here, he said softly. Jake stood a few feet back, a bouquet of white lilies in hand. I'm sorry, Jake said. I didn't know he was your partner. He was more than that, Elijah said. We saved each other. Over and over. Jake approached, slowly placing the flowers beside the flag. You ever wonder what he'd say about everything now? Elijah smiled faintly. He'd probably say I finally stopped being a stubborn jackass. Jake laughed softly. And me, he'd say you're still got a lot to learn, but you're on the right road. They stood in silence. Then Jake cleared his throat. I got offered my badge back. Elijah blinked. Did you take it? No. Elijah raised an eyebrow. I turned it down. I'm not that man anymore. I don't want the badge back. I want to fix what's behind it. Elijah nodded slowly, processing the weight of that decision. That's not easy, he said. Jake shrugged. Neither was facing you at that bank. They both laughed, the sound strange but real in a place built on quiet. Elijah took a deep breath. You know, when that medal fell out of my jacket that day, it didn't feel like honor. It felt like failure, that I had to flash credentials just to be seen as a human. Jake looked away, guilt creeping into his features. But now, Elijah continued, I think maybe it needed to fall. Not for me. For everyone else in that room. And for you. Jake swallowed hard. That moment broke me. But breaking made room for something better. Good, Elijah said, his tone full of calm steel. Because we've got more to do. Jake tilted his head. Like, what? Elijah turned, eyes focused. Community policing, mentorship programs, teaching young officers how not to become who you were. I want to take this national. And I want you on it. Jake froze. You're serious. As death. Jake stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. Let's do it. 1 year later, the auditorium at Columbia University was packed. Students, professors, cadets, journalists. They all came to hear the story that shook a city and redefined 2 lives. On stage were 2 chairs. Elijah Brooks sat in one, posture firm, voice smooth. Jake Brenner sat beside him, still carrying the weight of his past, but using it now as fuel for a better future. A moderator asked, if you could go back to that day in the bank, what would you do differently? Jake leaned into the mic. Everything. I'd ask questions. I'd listen. I'd see the man, not the skin. The moderator turned to Elijah. And you, would you still walk into that bank that day? Elijah chuckled. Absolutely. Because if I didn't, we wouldn't be here. Sometimes change doesn't knock on the door. Sometimes it drags you out in cuffs first. The crowd laughed, a little uncomfortably, but genuinely. A student raised her hand. Mr. Brooks, what gives you hope? Elijah paused, then pointed at Jake. Him. Jake blinked in surprise. Elijah continued. Hope isn't about never falling. It's about what you do when you hit the floor. Jake fell hard. But he stood up stronger. That's what we need, not perfect men. Accountable ones. The room exploded in applause. Later that night, at a quiet bar near the university, the two men sat in a corner booth. No cameras, no speeches. Just two people who'd been through hell together, on different sides of the same battlefield. Jake raised his glass to falling metals. Elijah clinked it to standing men. They drank. Jake set his glass down. Do you think it'll ever really change? Elijah looked around at the laughter, the diverse faces, the open conversations. It already has, he said, just not fast enough. They fell silent again, and then Elijah said, almost to himself, you know, I used to think that silence was safety, that if I kept my head down, my credentials up, I'd be safe. But silence didn't save me that day in the bank. Truth did. Jake nodded. And your voice. Elijah looked at him, eyes intense. Now it's your turn to use yours. Jake smiled faintly. I already am. You just don't hear it yet. Elijah laughed. Oh, I hear it, loud and clear. Epilogue. In a small precinct in rural Alabama, a young white officer is shown a body cam video during training. The instructor pauses the footage right at the moment Jake handcuffed Elijah. This, the instructor says, is what not to do. Another clip plays. This time it's Jake speaking to a group of cadets, telling the story raw, honest, unfiltered, and beside the screen is a photo, Jake shaking hands with Elijah, both smiling, tired but proud. The young officer scribbles in her notebook, assume nothing, respect always, learn the whole story. And as the training ends, another future begins. Because one day in a bank, someone won't get cuffed. They'll get asked a question instead. And maybe, just maybe, the badge won't fall because it will already be held with honor.